We are continuing our study on the theme of Get in the Game. Very appropriate. Now, we're not talking about sports teams getting in that type of game. It really, as we look at the various sports that are going on, we're getting ready to have a World Series championship team with the Reds this year. The Bengals are going to win the Super Bowl. And let's see, Kentucky is not going to win the NCAA, are they? But we do have Indiana, close by school, still in the NCAA. It makes no difference, or soccer, if your child plays soccer. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the Christian game of life. Tonight, I'd like to focus a little bit on traditions. Many of us, including me, have said that, we need to get rid of traditions. It's holding the church back. And true, if it's holding the church back, we need to take a look at it. But there's a positive side to traditions. True, Summit is not a church of the 1950s. We didn't have this kind of visual in the 1950s. But you know what? We had the old bedsheet sermons. Do you all remember that? If you went to a revival, these preachers who traveled all over the country, they ordered every year a new set of bedsheet sermons. And believe you me, they were very visual. There were pictures of hell. There were scriptures. In fact, it was so lucrative that there was a person in Indiana who did this almost for a living. He prepared those bedsheet sermons. Well, we have much better today, don't we? So we're not a church of the 1950s. We're keeping up. Norm and I spent about 2 months in Florida, and you know what? We saw some of you because we now have live streaming all over the world. The church there in Naples do not have a Sunday evening service, so many times we would tune in. A couple of weeks we had a little problem with the internet, but other than that, we were a part of the church here. But you know what? As we think about traditions, it's important that we look at some of these memorials as an anchor. We never let go of what is anchored. A few years ago, a distant cousin of mine wrote a book on the Carter family. And after buying that book, I decided one time that I would like to locate the cemeteries and take a picture of the gravestones of some of my ancestors. I'll never forget, Norma and I took a trip to Lawrence County, Kentucky. Louisa, Kentucky. Anybody here from Louisa? That's where my great-grandparents and my great-great-grandparents were buried. Now, unfortunately, the slide that we have here doesn't show up as it should. That's my fault. I got it too small. But that's my great-great-grandfather and grandmother, dating back to the early 1800s. That means a lot to me. Does that mean that I'm going to neglect my children and my grandchildren? Obviously not. I'm going to provide the best for them that I possibly can. Well, you didn't come here to listen to me talk about my family tree. Let's turn to Joshua, the 4th chapter, and we'll look at some verses there with the time that we have left, looking at some of the memorials or a memorial that was erected at that time, and look at the purpose of that. And that's going to lead us into our application, which will be a mock debate. Joshua, the 4th chapter, beginning in verse number 1. And it came to pass when all the people had crossed or completely crossed over the Jordan, and I think there were around, 40,000 of them who crossed, that the Lord spoke to Joshua, saying, Take for yourselves 12 men from the people, one man from every tribe, and command them, saying, Take for yourselves 12 stones from here, out of the midst of the Jordan, from the place where the priest's feet stood firm. You shall carry them over with you and leave them in the lodging place where you lodge tonight. And that lodging place that we'll look at a little bit later was Gilgal. Now, the Jordan River, of course, is a famous river. It's where Jesus was baptized. John was doing baptisms in that area. The Jordan River, at certain times of the year, got rather wild. And if you go back to the 3rd chapter, you'll see that at this particular time, it was pretty wild. The Jordan was a river that was about 120 miles long. You can see it on the screen there. It flows from the Sea of Galilee down to the Dead Sea, and of course, as I said, it was a pretty famous river at that particular time. And of course, it's been fought over by the Israelites and the Palestinians probably ever since. Moving ahead a little bit faster. He said, take 12 stones. I put 4 pictures up there of various stones. Nobody knows exactly the shape of those stones, but there are 12 of them, one from every tribe. And they're set up there, or to be set in Gilgal for a purpose. And we'll look at that purpose in just a moment. I want to move through this pretty quickly. Joshua, who was leading the children of Israel at this time, reminded the people that, hey, we've got some real challenges for us. Moses brought you out of the land of bondage. That they were definitely in bondage. And he said, you're going to face some real problems. There are going to be some fortified cities that you're going to have to overcome. But The important thing is that we look at that the voice of the Lord is powerful. The voice of the Lord is full of majesty. Psalm 29 and verse number 4. I'm going to skip right on through this. Also, Joshua said in Joshua the 23rd chapter and verse number 14, you know that all of your heart and soul, that not one of those good promises that the Lord your God gave you has failed. And that's very important especially at this time. But I want to go back and talk about these stones. They were laid there for a purpose. And the purpose was so that your children would ask you the question, what means these stones? What do these stones mean? And he said, tell them that the Lord has provided a way for you to cross the River Jordan on dry ground. Even though at that particular time, Jordan was overflowing, God provided a way for them to cross it on dry ground. And then Joshua said, take 12 stones, one from each tribe, as a memorial. Question I want to leave us with before we get into the next part of our program. What memorial are we leaving today for the next generation? One thing, this is very positive. We prepare our young people. I've told you this before. In my lifetime, I have either attended or been a member of 8 different congregations. Of those 8, 3 of them no longer exist. I remember standing right out there in that hall, asking Jim York one day. Norm and I were preparing to go to Branson. We wanted to drive part of the way, and I said, Jim, I'd like to go back to Bardstown Road Church of Christ. I went there, I attended that congregation. I wasn't a Christian, but I attended that congregation in the 1950s. It was a congregation that reminded me a lot of Summit. A lot of Summit. Very active. Jim looked at me, and he said, Ken, there is no Bardstown Road Church of Christ anymore. After he picked me up off the floor, I said, why? He said, they grew old and died. That's not happening here at Summit. And it will not happen if we will dedicate ourselves to continuing what is going on right now with our young people. I looked at that list that Brian provided for us of all the people who are participating in Lads to Leaders this week, and it just blows my mind. It's wonderful. I appreciate the fact that Neville took the major part in preparing these young people for the debate. Now, I was supposed to be a part of that, and I did help out a little bit in November and this month, but Neville really worked hard. These young men are great. You're going to see it in a few minutes. They know the Scripture, and they know how to convince you. We're going to look at the affirmative side, and we're going to look at the negative side. And as Tom announced earlier, We're going to correct that negative side so that nobody here will get the wrong impression. Okay? So our two guys, are you about ready to go? Okay? Here is the